The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
During May, there were multiple pipeline oil spills from pipelines owned by Shell, and you probably heard nothing about it because the story was completely missing from corporate media. As usual, the first one off the coast of Louisiana in the Gulf of Mexico, initial number of about 90,000 gallons based on a helicopter survey done by Shell itself. And we know that historically those numbers are often off by orders of magnitude, particularly when it's the spilling company self-reporting how much has been spilled. Royal Dutch Shell was forced to they call it shutting in, shut down essentially, but shut in all wells that flow to what they call its Brutus platform. The U.S. Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement said that a 2-mile by 13-mile sheen was visible in the sea just under 100 miles from the Louisiana coast. The spill reportedly will have no major effect on surface life in the ocean, according to WMNF radio, but there could likely be an impact on deep marine life in the Gulf, including coral, dolphins, whale sharks, etc. Louis, the other day I was at the grocery store and they had like a special thing, Gulf shrimp. And I was like, oh no, I'm particularly staying away from that.
I have been saying that since
Deepwater
the original disaster years ago. And what was it now, 2-3 years ago? I don't know.
I think it might have been more.
Yeah, maybe more. I was in Texas too, and I avoided Gulf seafood like the plague. I'm never going to set foot in there. I'm never going to eat seafood from there, if at least not knowingly.
A second spill also happened last month, also from a Shell pipeline in California's Central Valley. The estimate there is about 21,000 gallons. And Shell reported that leak after they noticed that its pipeline lost pressure on Friday morning, which indicates that there's a leak and it shut off the flow of oil. San Joaquin County officials say the crude was visible in a 250 by 40 foot area on the ground. And you might be saying, well, it isn't that much oil, but Shell itself said that no release of oil is acceptable. And the same Central Valley, California pipeline sprung a leak just 8 months ago in almost the exact same location, spilling roughly the exact same amount of oil into the ground. And to add, I guess we can call it irony to injury, the spill occurred on the site of one of the state's largest wind energy developments, the Altamont Pass wind farm. Louis, no negative environmental effects reported from the wind farm.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising that this was so underreported.
Yeah.
I don't really know why that would be.
Well,
but it never ends. I mean, we really need to get serious with the fines levied against these companies because even when it's $2-3 billion, which it almost never is, it doesn't even matter to these companies.
Well, they price it in, right? They do business accounting for the probability that they will have to pay fines. So it's already in their accounting in most cases, right? The fines are if you don't fine them, they come out ahead of where they expect to be. And as far as why it's not covered, is it just not news? I mean, pipelines seem to be leaking oil so frequently that maybe it's just not actually newsworthy. There's the other angle, which is corporate media has no real incentive to report on this. People didn't die like in Deepwater Horizon. It's way offshore, so you don't have images of birds covered in oil, which also titillates and drives ratings. So what's the real story? What can corporate media really do with this?
I suppose that's it. It's mostly a visual medium, and so if it bleeds, it leads, they say, right? And we just maybe we just didn't have the juicy footage here.
And you'd think with the constant spills that we'd be ready for some kind of real reform, but oh, that's right, Republicans and Democrats alike are wedded to the industry through political donations, which of course we're led to believe don't impact at all what it is that they decide to vote for or against or not even discuss as a matter of policy. Yeah, I believe that for sure. The Trump University scandal is exploding. Donald Trump's Trump University is being prosecuted for essentially being a scam, right? Trump has been railing against the judge in the case, Alfonso Curiel, on the basis that the judge's parents were Mexican immigrants, so that way the judge is biased against Trump. Replace Mexican with black or Jewish or a woman, and you'd have a drastically different reaction, I contend. But here's the latest. Not only does Trump University appear to be a scam, and I'll play an interview with a former Trump University student in a bit, it's looking more and more like total corruption. Trump may have used political contributions to essentially buy his way out of trouble for Trump University. In New York, the prosecution is going forward, and their Attorney General Eric Schneiderman is the guy who's decided to move forward with the trial, or with the prosecution, rather. A judge has decided to move forward with the trial. And Donald Trump often defends Trump University by saying, hey, Eric Schneiderman is biased. There are plenty of other attorneys general in other states who looked at the case and they decided there was nothing to prosecute. Well, that's true, Louis, but it's often a little more complex than Trump wants you to believe, because the Associated Press looked into two of those examples and it doesn't look good. In Texas and in Florida. Let's start with Texas. Greg Abbott, now the state's governor, the former attorney general, reportedly started looking into Trump University, as Donald Trump admits, and possibly deceptive trade practices. And all of a sudden, you had that probe quietly dropped in 2010 when Trump University agreed to end operations in Texas. Well, it must have been because Greg Abbott determined there was no wrongdoing, right? Well, maybe, but Trump immediately after that decision was made donated $35,000 to Greg Abbott's eventually successful gubernatorial campaign. Okay, Louis, it's the suggestion of impropriety, but it's nothing definitive. Fair enough. Well, what about Florida? In Florida, the AP reported that Attorney General Pam Bondi also considered joining Eric Schneiderman in a multi-state lawsuit against Trump University, but eventually decided against it. And by the way, there was a $250,000 contribution to a political fundraising committee supporting Pam Bondi's reelection campaign. Not proof, Louis, but it doesn't look good.
No. And why exactly would Trump have any interest in the campaign of Abbott or what's going on in Florida?
Well, the Florida one, he has many businesses in Florida.
That makes a bit more sense.
Yeah, I don't know.
Texas, Abbott, not so much.
But why would you give a donation to somebody who's investigating you is the question.
Yes. And I'm starting to think that these investigations were started just so that there could be a generous donation.
Oh, so you're going even further. The corruption is that you're agreeing with Trump the investigations were politically motivated in the sense that they were meant to get political contributions from him. You're going even darker and deeper than I'm going here.
Yeah, and while there definitely was merit to these investigations, it wouldn't surprise me if there was this this other motive. Why not?
This has all the makings of total gutter scum corruption, or as Trump would put it, this is the cost of doing business. The system is corrupt, and he's just doing what we can to work within that system.
That's actually true. That's 100% true. The system is corrupt, and everything that happened here was maybe legal.
Let's talk about Trump University, a former student named Sheri Winkelmann. This is someone who went on CNN. This interview is fascinating. She was interviewed by Don Lemon on CNN, and she was asked about Trump University and whether she believes it was a scam and a fraud and whatever, and she's getting destroyed by right-wingers. I'll tell you why, but first let's look at the clips. Here is the first one where she explains the entire thing was an absolute debacle.
So you're a former Trump University student. Do you believe that it was a fraud, as the Attorney General has said?
Absolutely. No doubt in my mind.
So just as the New York Attorney General has said, you believe that it was a fraud. There were several...
I do believe.
There were several different packages. You want to talk more about that, about why?
Yes. First of all, I signed up for the 3-day introductory seminar at $14.95, and we were told if by the end of the first day that we didn't want to stay for the 3 days, we could have our money refunded. I asked the instructor a lot of direct questions. They completely evaded answering them, so I started getting upset, feeling that this was not an actual learning seminar, but maybe just an upselling seminar. I tried to get my money back, and two other instructors were brought over and basically cornered me, telling me that I just didn't understand the material. I was confused. It's overwhelming. It's real estate. After all, I'm a newbie. If I just stay for 3 days, everything will become clear. So I had a very hard time from the get-go trying to get my money back.
You can get your money back anytime, but the only point at which you'll really know that you want your money back for sure would be after the 3 days when the offer for the money back is no longer valid. Trump has, look up a guy named Robert Kiyosaki, who's known as the rich dad, poor dad guy. He's worked with Trump. They both do these seminars where you don't really learn anything of value. A lot of it is just sort of create passive income streams by using techniques that probably won't work for most people to start acquiring rental properties. I mean, that's a lot of what this entire thing is. The partnership with Robert Kiyosaki was a big red flag for Trump. What this woman describes is exactly what it is that others are suggesting went on here. So now it gets even worse. Who was there? Who was being taken advantage of at Trump University, according to former student Sheri Winkelmann? Take a look.
As you said, what kind of people were signing up for that $35,000 package?
There was a lot of seniors there that had lost money in the stock market, you know, so they were working with trying to rebuild their retirement. There was some husband-wife teams. I partnered up with a soldier that had just returned. There was a couple veterans there from Iraq. He had gotten blown up in a tanker. He was on an honorable discharge, and he was trying to rebuild his life.
How
he
were they
also
paying
signed
for this?
Up. He wrote a check, and later the veterans' lawyers were able to help him with his case.
So seniors who had already lost a ton of money were desperate to try anything to rebuild their retirement accounts, hugely vulnerable. They sign up for Trump University scams and then combat veterans with serious injuries. Talk, Louis, about preying on the most vulnerable in society.
It's pretty bad, and it might not be that they were targeted by Trump University or whoever is selling for them, but perhaps maybe that it's just the most susceptible people were just kind of drawn to it.
And now I'm glad you used the term targeted, because listen to this, what else Sheri Winkelmann had to say.
Were these people who were, these weren't wealthy people, were they?
No, what they did was really pressure people. The mentors singled out the people that they saw from the financial statements had available credit lines, because we filled out our checking, our savings, our credit cards, and our credit limits and our balances. And so the second day of the seminar, the mentors that we were supposed to be working with actually took us outside of the room privately to help us work on our real estate goals. And basically had really pressured people into calling their credit card companies to up their credit limits so that they could pay for these seminars.
Disgusting. This is one person's claims, I get that, but it matches so much of what we've heard. Why would they need to know your credit cards and limits if this is a seminar to teach you real estate? Red alert. And Sheri Winkelmann is being given the full treatment for this interview. If you go to her website, which right-wingers have done, she appears to be like an actress. She does Marilyn Monroe impersonations. She seems to do a variety of things. And one of the things she says is that she likes working with women's groups that promote empowerment and success for women. Thus, the right-wingers are trashing Sheri Winkelmann as a shill for Hillary Clinton who was paid to go and do this interview. We have no evidence that that's the case, but she's being given the full treatment. Maybe not by all right-wingers, but certainly by Trump supporters.
Not surprising. They have to defend their guy. Yeah, that's what they do. It does sound like a lot of what we've been hearing. This is exactly how it goes down. And I guess the targeting happened after you originally signed up, asking for all that information. Wow, Dave.
Absolute pond scum. If I'm missing something about the great opportunities presented by Trump University, send me a tweet. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is J.H. Rathod. J.H., thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. We only exist because of members. If you like this show, then the best thing you can do is sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. If you don't like the show, what you can do is not sign up. And we know the detractors are already doing that, Louis. So vote with your dollars, really pennies. We're talking about pennies a day to become a member at davidpakman.com/membership. Okay, I have something very exciting going on, Louis. We did this months and months ago, and I've been waiting on this for a while because we had the USB drive giveaway for membership. We had the t-shirt giveaway for membership. This is just a straight up half price offer I have. I have a very generous, longtime David Pakman Show member who about once a year contacts me and says, David, I want to help. I want to subsidize some memberships down to half price. So our normal $60 a year membership has been subsidized down to $30 by a generous member based in New York City. He's been helping us out for a long time. I have 20 of these discounted memberships available. So I have 20 $30 memberships available. You pay $30. This generous longtime member pays the other $30. And the magic of it all, Louis, is you get to keep that discounted rate as long as you want. Because it's a limited number, there's no website to go to or anything like that. We're just going to do these on a first come, first served basis. Contact us. You can email me directly, david@davidpakman.com, or you can use the contact form at davidpakman.com and just say, hey, I want one of those half-price memberships. Do you have any available? We are going to do an email blast about this, but not until tomorrow. So I'm announcing it on the show first. And it's actually possible, Louis, that these may all be spoken for before that email even goes out tomorrow. Get in touch. And I've banned Louis from taking advantage of any of the half-price members. It just doesn't seem fair, Louis, for you to get the half-price memberships.
No. I already have 7 million memberships.
I know.
Why do I need
20 more? What's that going to do?
Yeah.
At this point, you should be paying full price anyway. So 20 half-price memberships available. Also, we are taking calls again Thursday, June 9th, 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. We did it last week. We had another great success. We had a call about Mormonism. We had a call about what laws we would put into place. And someone called and wanted to argue with me that I'm wrong. Starship Troopers is actually a really good movie once you understand it's satirical, and then questions about Trump. It was great, Louis. I mean, it was call after call.
Yeah, it was. So far, it's been a great success. I hope the questions keep coming in.
Yeah. So mark it on your calendar. If you want to call in, we'll take live calls Thursday, 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. There's one phone number you need to know. That number is 617-830-4750. 20 half-price memberships available. Email me, david@davidpakman.com. Tell me, hey, I would like one of those half-price memberships. Okay, last thing before we move on. If you ever shop on Amazon.com, please go to davidpakman.com/Amazon first, because that way your shopping supports the work we do. Yet more people, Louis, buying one of my favorite sci-fi books, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by the great Philip K. Dick, eventually turned into the film Blade Runner. Did you know, Louis, Blade Runner 2 is coming?
Yes, I'm actually terrified at the thought of Blade Runner 2. I know Ridley Scott is still directing it, but...
Is he? You know what? I don't know if he is. Are you sure about that?
I'm quite certain he is.
Okay,
but I'm still worried because the original is just so great.
Yeah.
And how can this possibly match?
No, that's it's a fair question for sure. Also, somebody using our Amazon link to buy Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. I'm curious whether that's a satirical purchase to see sort of like what the craziness is about, or whether it is for real. There's a talk radio conference I sometimes go to, and talk radio is so right-wing dominated that there's actually a vendor which just sells. They're like curated Ayn Rand books with notes. Like it's almost like an annotated Bible. It's an annotated Ayn Rand book with commentary on the on opposing pages. It's all crazy. In any case, somebody using our link to buy Atlas Shrugged. Anytime you shop on Amazon, davidpakman.com/Amazon. I have a very disturbing story to tell you about. It starts with a judge named Aaron Persky, who sentenced a 23-year-old All-American former Stanford student named Brock Turner for sexually assaulting an unconscious female student behind a dumpster on the Stanford campus over a year and a half ago to 6 months in county jail, with the possibility, Louis, if he behaves well in county jail, of dropping that sentence to only 3 months. I guess that good behavior would involve not raping more people in county jail or something. Turner could have been sentenced up to 14 years in state prison. Prosecutors asked for 6 years in state prison, and instead the judge decided on 6 months in a county jail with the possibility of only 3 months. What were the reasons? Well, Turner's age and lack of criminal history were cited. Persky explained the sentence thusly: a prison sentence would have a severe impact on him. I think he will not be a danger to others. Let me see if I get it. The impact to the rapist of an unconscious woman of being sent to prison might be negative. All of a sudden, Louis, the justice system is concerned with the negative impact that prison has on people's lives. Not that the justice system shouldn't be concerned with that. I've argued that it hasn't been concerned with that for a long time. But we're going to take this case to make an example of that?
I guess when you are a white guy going to Stanford, that's when the white judges might be a bit worried about what prison does to you.
Well, to be very clear about the details, this isn't like a he said, she said type of thing. Nobody knows what happened. It's a mystery. Obviously, the girl doesn't know what happened because she was unconscious, but Brooke was spotted on top of his victim by 2 passing students. He ran, they tackled him and held him until campus security showed up. The victim woke up in a hospital the next day with no memory of what happened. Of course, no sexual assault trial is complete without finding fault with the victim and an excuse for the victimizer. In this case, they were both very drunk at the party, Louis. As Brock said in court in defense of himself, being drunk, I just couldn't make the best decisions, and neither could she. Lots of people are making bigger, broader arguments about so-called rape culture. It's really bringing out a lot of really low, base, vile elements of the internet. But you don't even need to go that far. Let's not even have that conversation. This is about one specific case where the punishment is not commensurate with the crime. You've got the white former Stanford athlete. The level of intoxication was considered a mitigating factor, and you end up with a 6-month or possibly 3-month jail sentence. This feels reminiscent of that affluenza case, and we know how that turned out, with authorities tracking the kid and his mother down in Mexico after fleeing from his parole officer.
Which, of course, that was just a parole violation.
Right.
Somehow the parole violation triggered something, this massive hunt. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's the exact same type of thing. We've covered other stories that are kind of similar, where well-to-do white person, for some reason, gets almost no sentence.
And for people who are going to email us and say we're playing up the social justice warrior nonsense that's popular on the internet among leftists, anybody who listens to the show any reasonable amount knows that we don't do that. We critique identity politics, but sometimes there are valid questions. And I do wonder, Louis, if this were a brown-skinned Syrian immigrant here legally, refugee status maybe, or just
not attending Stanford, by the way.
Not attending Stanford. Would the sentence be the same, and would people be satisfied with a 6-month county jail sentence when the max could have been 14 years in state prison? I truly wonder. I think the answer is no.
I think you're right. I agree.
Many times that type of question is out of place and not relevant, but I wonder here whether that is a good question. And you know what? If you want to email me and say, oh, there's David Pakman, the social justice warrior, blah, 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 do it if it makes you feel better. But sometimes these questions are legitimate. And when they're not, we call them out. You know we do, Louis.
Yeah, it's just a hypothetical. We can't recreate the situation with, but it's worth asking. It's worth exploring.
Discuss this and any other stories from today's show on our Reddit discussion forum. Go to davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. I have 20 half-priced subsidized memberships available. If you want one, email me, first come, first serve, david@davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Monique Morris, co-founder of the National Black Women's Justice Institute and author of the book Pushout, The Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools. Monique, it's so great to talk to you. You know, this issue of black girls in schools is one that has, I guess we could say, in a way, fortunately made it into the forefront for more people in the U.S. through some very specific stories that sort of went viral, news stories about specific incidents in schools. But this is actually an issue that, as your book reveals, has been a problem in schools for a very long time. I mean, how far back does this go?
You know, the issue goes back as far as, as far as we can tell. the 90s, the early to mid 90s, there are ways in which we've come to understand these issues around criminalization in schools, the implementation of zero tolerance policies in a way that has rendered many girls invisible in the discussion, but they, from the very beginning, were impacted by the increased surveillance, the increased policing in schools, as well as the absence of decision-making ability among key decision makers and administrators in schools in a way that did increase the way in which we were using discipline, particularly exclusionary discipline, the suspensions, expulsions, et cetera, with youth of color, including girls. And so, I would say probably as far back as the mid 1990s.
So there's no doubt that this is an issue that is impacting Black girls in schools. But talk a little bit about, for example, to take one example you mentioned, zero tolerance policies. How do zero tolerance policies disproportionately or acutely impact Black girls versus other groups?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize, as you're suggesting, that Black girls are not the only group of girls or the only group of children who are impacted by zero tolerance policies. But what has happened since there has been this removal of discretionary decision making among school administrators to approach each situation as an individual case or on a case-by-case basis, has been a uniform way in which we respond to the conditions impacting our children without consideration for some of the underlying factors, the trauma and victimization, et cetera. So for Black girls, we've seen them grow as the fastest growing population that has had experiences with suspensions and expulsions and other harsh punishment and exclusionary discipline, the corporal punishment, et cetera, have become the go-to response to problematic student behavior. And that's a problem when we read the behaviors of children differently, and we read the behaviors of some as more aggressive and dangerous than the behaviors of others. Girls, Black girls in particular, are disproportionately represented among low-performing high-poverty schools. And in those high-poverty schools, there tend to be an increased reliance on the exclusionary discipline in response to negative student behavior. So where administrators and schools believe that if a child has a conflict with another child or a conflict with a teacher, if they believe that discipline, suspensions, expulsions, corporal punishment, et cetera, are the most appropriate way to respond to that, then that's what they'll do. Those are the schools that produce the greatest numbers of kids who are criminalized as a function of these policies. Those are the schools that don't tend to have alternatives in place that allow for a child to learn from their experience and move forward in the way that other schools might have those in place as well. So when we talk about Black girls, I often talk about the ways in which the behaviors are read in a manner that is consistent with many of the stereotypes or memes that inform our consciousness and that inform how we engage them as individuals or not. And so girls, Black girls in particular, are cast in many learning environments as being loud, aggressive, sassy, hypersexual, and those play out in how we implement dress codes. Those play out in how our schools are implementing policies around safety, how adults are reading safety in classrooms, and has had a disproportionately negative impact, as I've been saying, on Black girls.
This is particularly interesting because as we start to get into the sort of what different people might consider implicit or explicit racism of many of these situations, I'd be very curious to get your thoughts on when we look at some examples of big city school segregation that often exists, racial segregation, de facto in many cases, whether you look at Newark or Detroit or even in New York City, where I lived up until months ago. Many times we have school systems that I'd be curious to hear from you if they are also guilty of disproportionately punishing Black girls, because in many cases, some of these school systems are very much run by Black school administrators. And I'm curious what your thought is on what the racism element is of this and whether this goes beyond the idea of white versus Black in the way that, as I saw the comments on other interviews you've done, some people seem to want to think about this. Is that even really a good way to explore this?
No, and I think that and nowhere in this conversation do I explicitly say that it's white versus black.
Right.
And I think really what this is a function of the implicit biases and the internalized oppressions that we see play out daily. And on the racial piece, it is important for us to recognize that there are racial disparities among the teaching force. That is disproportionately and overwhelmingly white, and students in our schools now who are disproportionately Black and Latino. And so there are cultural differences for sure. One of the things that I like to repeat and that I think is worthy of repeating is that I do believe that teachers go into the profession because they believe in the promise of education, they believe in the promise of our children, but all of us are living with implicit biases about how we understand each other and how we read behaviors. And even if how we behave and how we engage is stated in one way, we have to understand that our implicit biases are sometimes inconsistent with our stated values. And so we can talk about equity all day. We can say that we treat children the same or that we engage with them the same. But when we start to engage in them on a case-by-case basis, we're still, all of us, informed by our own implicit biases that will favor our own in-group. So we've got to be conscious of these biases and work around these biases if we're going to engage with each other. And for me, that's really at the core here. When you talk to girls about what they need to have a safe learning environment or what they need to be successful, they don't say that they need someone who looks like them or comes from their background. What they say is they need a caring person. And it's important to understand that, because many times in their lives, that caring person does reflect their community, does come from the community that they are from, and does understand them for who they are and engage them as a whole person. But many times they're interfacing with adults who don't, and who don't engage with them in a way that sees their entire being, just sees them as either a problematic child or sees them as a part of a community that is struggling and that has struggled to define its own scholarly identity in learning spaces. And so this is really what is at the core of this conversation. To me, it's not necessarily that a person who is not a person of color cannot engage with a child of color. That's absolutely false. But what I'm saying is that all of us need to be in spaces where we can critically examine our own biases, can critically examine the ways in which we've internalized the multiple oppressions that inform how we read behaviors, how we understand the identity of Black girls, and how we engage with them as individuals. And that, to me, is really at the core of this narrative.
Monique, in thinking about how we could move in a direction that would be more fair and equitable and not disproportionately negatively affect Black girls, I'm wondering if there is a sort of catch-22 involved here. And what I mean by that is, earlier in the interview, you said that it's a bad thing, it's a shame that many times individual cases aren't looked at on a one-on-one basis and really explored and understood for what they are. At the same time, it seems that bias is more easily going to be added to a situation if there are not specific guidelines for how situations should be handled that sort of divorce an individual's biases from their actions. So is this a catch-22 in some sense in thinking of how to deal with this?
Not really in my mind, because the biases are going to be there whether or not we have structures in place. I do believe, I've never called for an absence of structure. Mm-hmm. What I'm calling for is a co-constructed structure, not one that is hyper-punitive and that only establishes that the response to problematic student behavior is policing, arrest, suspensions, expulsions, removal from school, or corporal punishment. There is a full continuum of how we engage and increase the accountability around this work. And that is what we need to engage at this point. The structures absolutely do need to be in place. And in fact, when I talk about the ability for us to establish a new ecosystem that does support the healthy well-being and learning of Black girls in schools, I include a call for there to be some great rigor and interrogation around the development of culturally competent curriculum, gender responsive guidelines, and the ability for us to structure healing informed instruments to help adults who are engaging with children be able to assess their own engagement and decision making in a way that is as as capable of managing our biases and internalized oppressions as possible. These instruments are being developed, and other sort of systems in place, partnerships that can exist both with the affected population of girls as well as their families and communities and organizations that are providing additional services when girls are in need, are critical to this conversation. And that, to me, is where we begin to have policies and practices that are more reflective of a consciousness and a faith in the ability for our girls to perform, not one that is guiding us on how to keep them out of school. It's very important to recognize the protective factor of education in keeping girls out of contact with the criminal and juvenile legal system. So in my mind, that means all that we are doing to support education in our schools needs to be structured around this idea that it's important to keep girls in school, not finding new ways to get them out.
I'll remind you, the book is Pushout, The Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools. We've been speaking with the book's author, Monique Morris. Monique, really a pleasure having you on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Donald Trump had some unfortunate incidents revolving around black voters and black people over the weekend. First, Donald Trump attempted to play up how black people like him and how much he likes black people by pointing to a random black guy at the crowd that formed at one of his rallies over the weekend and directing everybody else to look at his African American. I present to you my new favorite clip.
Look at my African American over here. Look at him.
What was the context, Lewis? Well, let's look at a little more video and see if it makes more sense. If instead of showing you just 3 seconds, I show you what the context of this thing was. To me, it makes no more sense. Take a look.
We had a case where we had an African American guy who was a fan of mine. Great fan. Great guy. In fact, I want to find out what's going on with him.
Yeah.
You know what I'm... look at my African American over here. Look at him. Are you the greatest? You know what I'm talking about? Okay. So we have an African-American guy at one of the rallies a month.
You know what's been missing from this story? People were going nuts over the weekend saying like, wow, my African-American, the dude sounds like a slave owner. The context, when you add context, it makes it even worse because the context is Trump pointing out that they had a black guy at another rally who was behaving himself as if it's some kind of news that that there are some black people who manage to go to Trump rallies and not act the way Donald Trump characterizes them as acting. The context is far more offensive than just pointing at a random black dude and saying, check out my African American.
Yeah, it's just the word my, and very poor choice of words. But this isn't going to change anything for Donald Trump.
No, I mean, the supporters seem to eat this stuff up. And it's reminiscent of when Bill O'Reilly reported going to a traditionally black restaurant in Harlem, I believe it was, in New York City with Al Sharpton. And he was sort of surprised that people weren't saying more iced tea, MFer to the waitstaff. It's the same type of thing. Trump is pointing out, it's notable to Trump that there was a black guy at a rally who was the victim of violence as opposed to the perpetrator. And the person who was pointed out was Gregory Cheadle, a Republican California congressional candidate. He said he was not offended by Trump's comment. No surprise by that. You know what? Listen, Trump is going to have the best blacks in his administration. People are wondering where Trump gets his blacks because they're just going to be tremendous. And he gets the best blacks because he's the best and he'll have the best people around him. And he has binders full of black people. The way Mitt Romney had binders full of women, Trump apparently has a whole binder full of them.
He's only got one, and that's Ben Carson. And if Donald
Who's been
Trump,
fired, by the way.
Well, yeah, but they're probably still buddy, right? I mean, why did he get fired anyway?
I think they just said they were moving on to a different team to find Trump's VP or something.
Like a team comprised of people that have some type of political experience?
Right, yeah. They're getting someone who's marginally competent. It's sort of hard to believe this is real life, but it is. And speaking of problems that Donald Trump is having with black voters, And speaking of trying to pander to black people in the most offensive and deceitful ways possible, Donald Trump tweeted a picture of a black family on Saturday that absolutely does not support Trump and is furious. Let's take a look at this image, Lewis. As you see here, this was a retweet from someone named Don Vito08. Trump has retweeted stuff from Don Vito08 in the past that is totally bogus. And it is someone, the message is, "Thank you, Mr. Trump, for standing up for our country." There's a picture of a very nice looking black family with the message, "American families for Trump. We need a common sense president." In March, Trump was criticized for sharing an unflattering image of Heidi Cruz compared to Trump's wife, Melania. And it was also generated by this user, Don Vito08 on Twitter. And as many people on Twitter were quick to point out, this photograph first appeared last year in an article from the Cincinnati radio station WCPO about a Midwest black family reunion. Here is the same picture for our TV audience, completely unrelated to Donald Trump. The family in the picture are identified only as the Perry family. Now, if you go to a Google image search and just type in black family, it's on the third row of results for me. It's the one with all the red arrows around it there. Just this is what you would call, Lewis, stock photography of a black family, which is not really stock. It's a specific family. And BuzzFeed figured out that this is the family of Eddie and Vanessa Perry. Eddie Perry told BuzzFeed News that his the picture is from this family reunion. He remembers the photograph being taken. He said he saw this on the internet, and that it was total political propaganda. Their image was used without asking, Lewis. And this reminds me, you know Ben Dixon, of course. You've met Ben Dixon, Lewis. You know Ben.
I know Ben, yeah.
Ben does the show here in the studio. He sits in your chair. Benjamin Dixon hosted the Benjamin Dixon Show. He happens to be black and a supporter of Bernie Sanders. And he once was tweeted this picture, which I'm going to put up for you, where this is Bernie Sanders speaking at Olivet Institutional Baptist Church in one of the Carolinas. And you'll see that there's a banner on the stage behind Bernie where Ben Dixon is pictured. And it's just, Ben has no connection to this church whatsoever. And he just appeared like in a collage of black people who support Bernie Sanders. And it's an example of identity politics being used on both sides, Lewis. I don't know that we gain anything from playing the identity politics game. I think it's sort of a dead end. We need to distinguish identity politics from real conversations about white privilege, individualism, classism, etc. Sometimes people who critique identity politics basically just want to dismiss that there are any inequalities in our society. That's not what we do. But sometimes these things don't really serve any productive purpose. Ben's picture just showing up at a church in South Carolina behind Bernie Sanders, it made no sense. And the Perry family showing up in this tweet also makes no sense. But the identity politics game is very strong among the Trump campaign, pointing out a black guy in the audience, tweeting a picture of a black family that doesn't even actually support Donald Trump. This is politics 2016.
He can just pay off as many black people as he wants to stand in crowds or stand behind him.
Right, he's done that.
Yeah, that's the smart way to do this, not this. I mean, couldn't he have at least had someone who's really good with Photoshop put a Trump T-shirt on one of the people in this family?
Right.
Or a Trump sign somewhere in the background?
And of course, Trump gets caught in lie after lie, and his supporters look the other way. They give him a free pass. They don't care. But not a good weekend as far as the black electorate and Donald Trump, that's for sure. I have a voicemail number. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is an interesting question, which has a concise answer. Let's take a listen.
Oh, hi, David. Just want to tell you that I enjoy your show and everything. Bring up a lot of good points. I just wondered, I heard you were talking about your girlfriend at one point. I just wondered, is your girlfriend transgender?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. No, my girlfriend is not a transgender woman. She was born biologically female, and that's it. I mean, sometimes I feel like I need a longer answer, but it's a straightforward question, Lewis, with a straightforward answer.
We have clarity this evening.
On the bonus show today, Fox is apologizing for an X-Men poster after outrage broke out. We will talk about a former Secret Service member's book about Hillary Clinton, and we will also talk about messing with neo-Nazis on Twitter. Lewis will bring us all of those stories on today's bonus show. And let me remind you, If you've been thinking about getting a membership, but price is a barrier, we have a very generous longtime David Pakman Show member who has subsidized 20 yearly memberships. So instead of the normal $60 a year price, I have 20 memberships available for $30 a year. We are giving them away first come, first served. If you want one of them to get instant access to the bonus show and all of the other great member benefits, all you have to do is email me, david@davidpakman.com. Say, hey, I'd like one of those memberships, and I will send you a link where you can sign up.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.